Well, I apologize. This is a first. I've never been 7 minutes late for a webinar before, but I think anybody who lives in South Africa will maybe just give us a little bit of, cut us a little bit of a break. It has been a chaotic period, as you can imagine, in the news business. And of course, on top of everything else, we are finding it, well, there are other challenges, to put it mildly. But thank you for being with us today. We have got a very important webinar with our partners at Sable. Andrew Rissick. Andrew, my humblest apologies. We don't do this to anybody, and least of all to our valuable business partners at Sable, but lovely that that we are on this webinar today. Can you just give us an overview of what we're going to be talking about?
Okay, great. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I think you might have been on mute. Okay.
Yeah, great. Okay. Well, thanks very much for having us on today. And I do understand I'm actually sitting in Portugal, reading all this terrible news. So I wish you all well in South Africa at the moment. I've just come out of a 2-week quarantine, and I'm here for another 3 weeks, and then I'll be back to SA. But what we're talking about today, Alec, is we're just going to give an overview of the Portugal Golden Visa program. I think it's quite a well-known program amongst people who are looking for a plan B in South Africa. It's become very popular. We've been doing it since 2012. We've got in excess of 250 clients in the program now, and as you can imagine, in the last year or so, we've seen a definite uptick in interest. And sadly, the sort of events that are happening at the moment really do drive more and more inquiries. So we'll be discussing the actual investment opportunity with our friends from Morning Bridge Capital. We've been working with them since 2014, and we believe it's a fantastic and simple investment opportunity. But you know, really the prize in this conversation is the Portuguese residency that ultimately can lead to citizenship.
Kerry, I used to go to the World Economic Forum in Davos. Well, I suppose no one's been going for a couple of years, but I went there for 16 years. And in the early days, I didn't really know how Davos worked. And although it's a small town, it's very easy to get lost when you're a South African in the snow, because of course we don't know much about the snow. But I remember facilitating a lunch one day, and one of the guests at the lunch was Mampela Rampele, who was at the time the chancellor of, I think it was Wits University or Cape Town. Anyway, I arrived there, as I have here, late for the event, and she said to me, "Young man, you need to learn, we don't all operate on African time." So I know that you're probably thinking that we in South Africa are on African time, but these are very unusual circumstances we're dealing with at the moment.
I'm quite used to Portuguese time as well, so they're not too different in some occasions.
Okay. Well, we do try, you know, to overcome these labels that are put on us here in South Africa. But from your perspective, how are you guys involved with Sable? And before we go into the slide presentation itself.
Yeah, sure. Andy and Sable generally, we've been dealing with them, as Andy said, since about 2014. And we, as a development company, have been specializing in golden residency visa buyers, i.e. those tend to be the buyers from outside of Portugal. And Andy is our principal agent in South Africa, and over the years we've developed a very good working relationship, and of course a good number of clients. And we try to facilitate things as much as possible and making it as painless as possible for those who apply. And we did have a number of options, in as much that we had property and now private equity scheme. This particular webinar, we're discussing the private equity scheme, because obviously there are changes that Andy will probably expand on within the GRV system within Portugal.
Indeed, we've done a lot of webinars on Portugal in the past, primarily focusing on Alex Living, which is a mixed-use development in Lisbon. And of course, the golden visa expires on that, but it doesn't mean the golden visa is ending. If you want to invest in property in Lisbon or in Porto, I believe, it doesn't qualify for golden visas, or certainly that's what we've been told, but you can give us more insight on that side. But both Kerry and Andrew, I have no doubt that there are many people really keen to ask questions. I'm going to just explain to the community members who are on in attendance here how you do that. If you have a look on your control panel, you will see that there's a question mark, and click on the question mark, and the questions will come through, and I will ask the question then of Kerry and Andrew. And just to be absolutely certain that everybody is hearing us loud and clear, you'll also see a hand on your control panel, something like that. It's a bit of a high five hand or a waving your hand. If you can hear me loud and clear, please would you just click that hand now so that we know that all the technical issues are okay, let's have a look. Thank you very much. The hands have been raised, and that means I'm going to switch my camera off because I'm sure you want to see the good-looking guys. And Andy, the presentation is yours. You shout, and I will change the slides as we go through.
Great, thanks very much. Yeah, if you could move on to the next slide. Thanks, Alec. So just very briefly, I'm sure most attendees have probably heard of Sable. We'd hope if you are regular readers of BizNews and part of the BizNews community. We've certainly been a supporter of Alec and his team since they started, and it's worked really well. It's been a great partnership, so thank you, Alec. Just a little bit about our group. We're fundamentally a South African-owned business. We are global. Our headquarters are based in London. We have a strong presence in Portugal. That's where I am currently. And we've got a big office down in Cape Town. I think we've got just under 100 people working for us in Cape Town, Joburg and Durban, where we've got offices as well. 4 core services that we deal in: foreign exchange, we do offshore wealth planning and structuring, cross-border tax advising, and then we have a big residency and citizenship component to our business. I think many people know us through acquiring British nationality through Philip Gamble, one of our partners, and then we have this business called investment migration, is where people don't have any sort of claim back to some sort of foreign ancestry, like either British or possibly Dutch, etc. One can actually go and get residency or citizenship through investment, and Portugal has been definitely the flying star of our investment migration business for a long time. So, Alec, if you can move on to the next slide, I'll just very briefly.
Why is that, Andy? Before we do that, why Portugal? Is it particularly appealing for South Africans?
I think in our experience, and we really do offer all the programs, and I can tell you statistically, if you take all the other programs, you add them together and multiply by 10, you'll get what we do in Portugal. Really, I think it's twofold. Number one, it's geographically, it's very easy to resonate with the South African. If you come over here, I sort of call Portugal the Western Cape of Europe. It's not, it's 2 hours from 2.5 hour flight to Heathrow, so you can commute into the financial centers, but the lifestyle is really good. The cost of living is a lot more affordable, and it really ticks a lot of boxes. That's for people who looking to possibly make it a plan A. But the real reason, I think, is that one can start the 5-year clock ticking towards citizenship by making an investment and never having to physically relocate. It's a very low stay requirement. One needs to only spend on average 7 days a year in Portugal to meet the stay requirements. So, I mean, we've got clients who are now Portuguese citizens, and they've passed the language test after 5 years, and they've spent on average 35 to 40 days in Portugal. So I think that is definitely the most compelling reason. And also from an investment point of view, it's been a great investment, a euro-based asset.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So maybe what I'll do is I'll just flick through a couple of those points there. I think you know, we've touched on it. I mean, Portugal, it's a hard currency investment. It's firmly part of the Eurozone. And anecdotally, we've had a few clients who bought properties and have had to sell and get out of the program for personal reasons. To date, luckily, we still don't have a client who's made a bad investment. So we're very particular about the way we operate with our partners on the ground in Portugal. And part of the reason I'm here for 6 weeks at the moment is making sure that we're sourcing really good investments for our clients. And we don't work with any single particular partner. We need to make sure that we can service a wide range of investment needs for our clients. But there's some interesting stats. Those are slightly outdated, but there are over 400 South Africans in the program now. And that's across the board, of which just over 50% have been introduced into Portugal through Sable. And you can see by far the biggest investment sort of demographic are the Chinese. But if you look at the investment amount, it's been over 5 billion euros of direct investment, capital investment from people outside of Portugal, plus obviously all the other spin-offs. So it's really been a good program for the Portuguese government. I don't know if there's anything you want to particularly ask around these slides. You'll have a look down on the bottom right-hand corner, the different investment categories. And I think just before I hand over to Kerry to talk about the Morning Bridge business, Alex, two really important things to note. You touched on the changes that are happening in Portugal. As of 31 December this year, so in 6 months' time, real estate at 500,000 euros minimum will no longer qualify if you invest in the primary real estate markets, being Greater Lisbon, which includes Cascais, which has been a very popular investment destination for our clients, Porto and the greater sort of Porto region, and then the more sort of popular areas of the Algarve will all be excluded. So there's a narrow window of time left to get into those particular primary markets. One needs to be careful because there's a lot of, I think, quite unappealing investments being sort of offered in the South African market. But the other key change, and this is what we're talking about today, is this private equity category. We were the first to bring private equity to the market about 3 years ago, very successfully, and that minimum investment amount of 350,000 euros. At the end of the year, that minimum threshold goes from 350 to 500,000 euros. So the particular fund we're talking about today is currently 350,000, and we suspect by the end of September we will stop taking subscriptions at 350, just because of the logistics of preparing applications. It takes 3 months now with all the sort of COVID delays, getting documentation, etc. But we need to have a client's application submitted with the Portuguese immigration authorities before the 31st of the 12th this year. So there is a call to action here. If you want to come in at this reduced level, you really have probably got about 2.5 months to make that decision.
Andy, just so that I understand it better, up until the end of September, you can qualify for the golden visa, and I'm sure you'll tell us more about that in a moment, at 350,000 euros, but after going into next year, it's going to probably go up to 500,000. Is that correct?
Sorry, I was just muted there. Yes, that's correct, Alex. So from a date line point of view, it's from 1 January 2022. The minimum investment goes from 350 to 500. So you just buy a slightly bigger share. But the issue that we have, and where clients really need to be careful, is if you make a decision to invest at 350,000 in December, and you go and make the purchase, how Portugal works is one needs to make the investment. We then collate your application, which is quite complex, especially if you've got a big family, and then we need to submit that to the authorities. Now, the reality is, if you're trying to get, for instance, an unabridged birth certificate or an unabridged marriage certificate, it can take 6 or 7 months with Home Affairs at the moment. And this is where we're seeing big delays in being able to actually submit an application. And if any delay in documentation takes you over the date of 31/12/2021, you will then fall into the 500,000 category. So all we're doing is we're just cautioning that don't leave it to the last minute.
Brilliant. In other words, if this appeals to you, Vikkel, and I'm sure that this, given what's happened recently, those who weren't thinking about a plan B, as you described it, are certainly having it somewhere on their agenda.
Yeah.
Shall I go to the next slide?
I think so, and probably a good time to jump into the actual Rebello private equity fund. So over to Kerry.
Coming. Alec, if we could have the next slide, please. What I'll do is I'll talk a bit about Morning Bridge, who we are and what we're offering before we actually talk about the Rebello and the particular private equity fund that we're looking at. Morning Bridge is a Portuguese registered company. It's a limited company, but it's actually run by the Brits. There's a number of us in there, and this is our 6th project. Originally, we started off as a pure development company, and we started in the Algarve, and then various things happened, credit crunch being one of them. So we eventually moved our business up to Lisbon. And in 2014, when the Euro crisis was at its height and the golden residency visa scheme was allowed by the Portuguese government, we decided that it was a market that we wanted to concentrate on, and that's the beginning of the times when we met Andy and Sable. Now, the first project that we had was called the Lumiares, and effectively what this is a development of 53 apartments, and in those days, in order to qualify for a golden residency visa, you had to spend 500,000 on property. So effectively what we did was we took this to the market and we said, here is the qualification that you need for your golden residency visa. But unlike other developers, what we will do is we will build you the apartment, but then we will stay in the project and we'll manage it on your behalf. So we'll try and make it as easy for you as possible. And this seemed to work. I mean, it does take a huge leap of faith for me to turn up to Johannesburg or Cape Town or Hong Kong and say, give me €500,000 and I'll build you something the other side of the world. So this was the first project that we did. It's now running very successfully. The hotel has been open for a number of years now. And if you want to see what we do and how we do it, then by all means, go on to booking.com or TripAdvisor or hotels.com. And you can actually see the hotel operation side as well. Yesterday, I believe we're now rated in the top 10 hotels in Lisbon. And what we plan to do is mirror that with the Rebello project in Porto. So moving on from there, the second hotel project that we did was called the Vintage. Now, as Andy alluded to earlier, the private equity scheme has been in existence now for a number of years, 2 or 3 years. And the first fund that we did, the Rebello, is our second fund. The first fund is called the Vintage. And I think we were actually the second fund, private equity fund for golden visa eligibility. And what we did there was we had a hotel, we racked it within the private equity fund, and we sold those various units. And Andy brought us a good number of clients from South Africa in that particular one as well. So what I want to talk about now is effectively the Rebello, which is the latest private equity scheme that we've got. As both Andy and Alec have alluded to, the current, what we call PEF unit, private equity fund unit, for qualification is 350,000 euros. That is changing on the 1st of January of next year. And what we're looking at with the Rebello is an apart hotel, very similar to the Lumiares. It will be opening next year. So by that stage, we will be well over, hopefully, the COVID situation. It is a financial product, but it is actually what I call property by proxy. So effectively, what you're doing is you are investing in the company that owns the bricks and mortar of the development. Returns will come from the hotel management. And as I've said, by all means, have a look at Bon Porto Hotels, which is the hotel company that we set up, which currently runs the Vintage and the Lumiarish in Lisbon. Okay, Alec, can I have the next slide, please? So, what is the Rebello? I don't know how many of you have been to Portugal. I'm sure everybody has heard of port wine. This is where it comes from. The wine is named after the town. And what we have, the development, is 6 old wine warehouses based on the south side of the River Douro. Now, it's actually on the River Douro. It's called the Rebello because dead opposite it is the place where they actually build the Rebello, and the Rebello were the old traditional port boats coming up and down from the Quintas. So what we're looking at is a 6 old wine warehouse right on the river with fabulous views looking down towards the Dom Luís Bridge, which, if any of you have ever seen a picture of Porto, is the big steel structure built by Eiffel back in the 19th century. And the development looks directly onto that. So nobody can build in front of you. It is absolutely a fabulous site, and it looks over Porto Old Town, which is the UNESCO heritage site. The development itself is 106 apartments. Now, when we originally conceived this idea, we were going to follow the original route of title deed on apartments. So the original plan was to build 106 apartments, retain a few ourselves, and sell the rest for golden residency visas. As we've alluded to, things are now changing. So the situation is that of those 106 apartments, we have actually sold 26, and we are wrapping the rest of the development within the private equity scheme. So instead of owning a particular apartment, you will own 125th of the remaining development, which is obviously the majority of it. It's 80 apartments, plus all the common areas of the car parks and the restaurants and the pools and spas, etc. Okay. Can I have the next slide, please, Alec?
Got it?
Yeah. So regarding the construction, we started in November 19, and obviously with COVID and all the rest of it, we actually managed to continue construction all through last year. Now, obviously with COVID and safety distancing and all that sort of thing involved as well, plus a couple of the workmen going down with it, we've actually lost 2 months of construction. Having said that, we always build contingency into our developments, and so what we're looking at is to have a soft opening of the hotel in Q3 of next year, and we're still on track for that. Hopefully by that stage and towards the end of this year, COVID will be behind us. We're 2 months behind. The contractor is confident that he will make that 2 months up by next year, and like I say, we have contingency built in anyway. We will be 50% built at the end of August, and what we mean by that is that the roof is on, the windows are in, and the entire development is watertight and weatherproof, and then it's a case of fitting out. I've lost my screen here, Alec, with the slides.
It's coming back in a second. My apologies, user error. It'll be with you in a second. Okay.
To err is human, to really help. That requires a computer, I find.
Yeah, it'll be back in 2 ticks. Okay.
All right. So, yes, here we go. So, as far as the fund is actually concerned, like I say, what we're looking to do is to put the remaining 80 units and all the common parts wrapped within the private equity fund. The number of fund units, i.e. the number of investors that we would like to bring into it, is 125 investors in all. Some of these units have already been sold. We like to align ourselves with our investors as well. in as much that we go on this journey together. The guys that we sold to in the Lumiares, for example, in Lisbon, after 7 years, we're still with them. And unlike other developers, if something goes wrong, you're probably going to be talking to the guy that actually sold you the unit in the first place, i.e. me or one of my colleagues. Okay, there's 100 units left to sell, and there are considerable advantages in taking a private equity unit over and above a property purchase. Now, one of them is, as far as the Portuguese government is concerned, is your investment is completely tax-free. So you would invest 350,000, and any returns you get are tax-free as far as the Portuguese government are concerned. You have none of the closing costs, which you do with property, which usually equate to between 8 and 10% for conveyancing, solicitors' fees, and stamp duties, and mortgage fees, and all that sort of thing. So there's none of that as well. The hurdle is considerably less as well, at 350 as opposed to the 500. And if the driver for you is a golden residency visa, then this is by far and away the easiest way to obtain one. The whole process is usually held up by the investors getting the various police clearances and their documentation together. As far as the application is concerned, on this particular private equity scheme, is we have to have a certified copy of your passport. You fill out 4 forms from the fund manager, who is called Lintz. He then passes you, and effectively he welcomes you as a sophisticated investor into the fund. And once you've paid the money over, you get the declaration, and you use that declaration for your golden residency visa. And it is as simple as that. Okay. Are there any specific questions on that, or does people would like to know a bit more about the development itself, or what stage we're at?
Okay, I'm just going to just bear with me if something goes wrong. No, didn't go wrong. That's good. No, we aren't. There's no questions that have been posed yet, which is interesting. That's most unusual for our community. Maybe you're doing such a wonderful job of telling us about that. If you have any questions, just to remind you, you've got a little question mark on the control panel. Just type in your question, and I will not disclose your surname. So we'll only identify you by your first name, which will help you to remain anonymous. Kerry?
Yep, well, I'll expand a bit. I mean, one of the questions that is commonly asked is, why did you suddenly wrap this into a private equity fund when you were originally going to sell it as property? Well, one of the reasons, obviously, is we learned early on of the golden residency visa changes. The second reason, primarily, is that we've seen increasing interest from the Middle East and from India as well into golden residency visas, and they tend not to like financial products. So by offering them bricks and mortar, we capture both the people who are familiar with financial products and the bricks and mortar. But obviously, with the various GRV changes that have come in, it is now prudent, and we put the whole lot into the private equity scheme. Another question that sometimes arises is, okay, this is a private equity fund, but it's actually a single asset private equity fund. And we've done that quite deliberately. If you want to speculate in funds, then this is not the fund for you. What we are primarily driven by and at is to go on a journey with our various investors to protect their capital, to give them a reasonable return, but not a speculative return. So there is preservation of capital, and to give them the opportunity to obtain a golden residency visa. So if you want a 40% return, that's not us, I'm afraid.
Kerry, I'm kind of losing you a little bit here. I hope it's only me, but we also have plenty questions. So yeah, they've just all come through now. Just a bit worried about your audio seemed to get lost somewhere along those. But let's kick off. Chris asks, how many investors from South Africa do you have so far?
Oh, that's a leading question. Across the whole board, or Andy, if he's got the actual number, Andy, do you want to answer that? I can't hear you.
There we
Andy?
go. I'm unmuted.
Yeah. Okay.
I think look through. Can you hear me now, Alec?
Oh, you're fine. You unmuted now. Yes.
Yeah, I think we through Sable, close on 40 investors so far. There are other South Africans I know that have found their way to our partners without using Sable. But yeah, it's been really popular. I think what's happening at the moment, and just touching on that point that Kerry made about why a single asset fund, is that the Portuguese government were going to actually institute these changes 1st of January this year, and they actually extended it by 1 year because of the effects of COVID. There was an enormous amount of lobbying. Lisbon, Porto, all those real estate markets would have already been out of contention. So I think that's an important point. But in terms of the funds, and I think it's important for me as an independent advisor on people's immigration investments offshore, is that there's a lot of funds that are suddenly being marketed in the South African space, and there's an enormous amount of risk, because the fund rules are actually quite wide in terms of qualifying fund. 60% of the assets in the fund needs to be invested in Portugal. The rest can be outside of Portugal. If it's seen as a ruse to try and actually make a real estate investment, I believe that those funds are going to become tricky. We're aware of a fund. I went up and actually had a look at the assets yesterday, where people have invested and nobody's qualified yet for residency because the investment authorities are not happy with the underlying investments. What is really key is to understand what the government are trying to achieve with these private equity funds. Is they want investment into Portuguese businesses. They're not looking to sell real estate in Porto and Lisbon anymore. They've achieved that goal of driving that market to where it is today, and getting a lot of money in where they could fix up common areas in those two cities, which have really regenerated amazingly in the last 5 or 6 years. But these private equity funds are there to try and drive investment into Portuguese businesses. And this hotel group, Porto, employs a lot of people, and it's really about job creation and about investing in a business. So I think that's an important point to also understand.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andy. There are really lots of questions now. Let's get on to one from Robbie, who says, I assume there are distributions. How would these work?
As I'm sure I'm talking to people who know, this is a national product. And what we say is that we will give you a 3% return on your investment. So if that's 350,000, every year we will give you 10,500, which is 3%. As I mentioned earlier, there is no deduction from the Portuguese government on that at all. That goes straight into your bank account. That does not, that's return of 3%. I can't tell you that it's what I would like to say is guaranteed. The reason I can't say it's guaranteed is if I put that in any of the literature, then it could be interpreted as being a bond as opposed to a private equity fund. And bonds aren't eligible for the golden residency visa. So what I say is I promise to pay you 3% per annum on your sum insured, your sum invested, and as well as that, you will get a share of the operating turnover of the hotel operations as well. Now, being a brand new, or it will be a brand new hotel, then obviously we have to make certain provisions for a capital reserve and things like that for future investments and keep the standard of the hotel up. But you get a share of that as well. So it's 3% plus share of the operating profit. That will be paid after usually the AGM that has to be called every year. The returns for the private equity fund come from the hotel operations. The fund holders own the bricks and mortar of the operation. So in the event that Bom Porto do very badly, and I hope we won't because we've got a very good track record, there could be a situation where somebody says, I'm unhappy with Bom Porto that's operating the hotel, I'd like Ritz-Carlton or I'd like Hilton. That goes to the vote at the annual general meeting, and by a show of hands, majority, etc., then that happens. So the point I'm trying to illustrate is that we promise you the returns through our hotel operating company, but the care, custody, and control is very much in the hands of the investors.
Kerry, your sound is awful, and I'm getting a lot of people complaining. Is there any way you can bring it a little closer or bring your microphone closer? It's very difficult to hear you.
Kerry, I think if you're on your laptop, I think your microphone's possibly rubbing on something.
Oh, okay.
Because there's a lot of sort of shuffling noise near the microphone.
Sorry, I have a notepad nearby. Is that any better?
Yeah, that
sounds a lot
better.
better. Thank you. Thanks.
Sorry.
Thanks.
Okay. Do you want to ask that question again, Alec, or
let's carry on with there are many other questions, so let's carry on with them, and then you can perhaps fill in with some of the things that you've said. Marion wants to know, is there only one golden visa per person? Can a husband and wife get visas with one investment of 350,000 euros?
Yes, but I'll allow
Marion,
Andy
that's a great question. Yeah, so how it works is for no further capital investment, the main investor, so either the husband or the wife is the main investor. Then you can tag along your spouse and your dependent children. So children under the age of 18 can automatically tag along, and if they're 18 and over, then you need to prove dependency. So how you prove dependency is your offspring need to be unmarried, they need to be financially dependent on you, and studying in a tertiary institution. So yeah, it makes a small difference in terms of some of your legal costs because there are more people on the application, but no further capital requirement in terms of investment.
So the answer is yes. You have one of the partners and you get a visa and you can both go there, which I guess makes sense because you don't want to leave your significant other at home.
Depends. I've got some of those.
Oh, okay. Enough. Steve asks, he says, what was the price of the 26 units that have already been sold?
Obviously, these were different apartments, so they had a variety of prices on them. Let me just, I do have the price here. It was to the tune of, I think it was 5 million. No, sorry, the apartments are 11.6 million have been sold.
How does that compare with, I think that's really where he's getting to, is Steve's getting to, is how does that compare with the way they're being priced now?
We priced it obviously when we did the original development, and effectively what happened, or what is happening, is that the fund is taking over the other part of those unsold apartments. It has been priced up at a market price, and the fund itself will be to the tune of 43,750,000, which is the price of the other 80 apartments plus the common areas.
So is it roughly in line with what you sold for?
Sorry, I had a cross line there.
Yeah, we were over talking each other. Is it roughly in line?
Yes.
The pricing of the project roughly in line with the price that's been received for those other 26?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes, yeah, that is correct. And I think important to note is that you're buying a share in a fund that owns the balance of the apartment. So you're not actually buying a specific unit. Whereas the apartments that have been sold as real estate investments, those investors will get a title deed and they actually own it as part of the rental pool, etc., etc. But that's no longer available. The remaining investment opportunity is all within the private equity fund.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Diane asks, once one makes the investment, how long will it take to get the golden visa?
As far as,
Okay.
if I start with that and then hand it over to you, Andy, the process, I offer the means to get the application going, which is the private equity fund. The private equity fund, we can get you through the entire process within a week. The delay tends to be in getting the bank account and all the rest of it. But Andy, if you hand over from there, I can get you the reason to apply very quickly indeed.
Yeah, so that's a big question, and it's a very, very important question, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier. Making the investment in Portugal is the really easy bit. Getting the application and getting your first residency card is the difficult bit. There are people out there who are saying it's really easy and it happens quickly. What we're seeing at the moment, just to set expectations, is anywhere from 8 months even to a year and a half from when we submit to when a client first actually gets a residency card. And this is primarily driven by two factors. It is a very popular program, and even throughout COVID, the numbers of investments have been significant. There hasn't been a drop off at all in the investment into the golden visa. What has happened is where the drop has come off, and this is sometimes reported in the press, is that the amount of golden visas that are being issued has reduced, and that is because of massive staffing shortages at the immigration authority, particularly during the hard COVID times when there was a case in the immigration office and then they had shut down. So, you know, there is a lot of bureaucracy in terms of getting these applications processed, but we just, from an expectation management view, we say minimum 8 months. In law, it's written that it should take 90 days. It used to before 2015. Since 2015, we've never seen applications coming through that quickly. Pre-approvals are quick, and the good news is that we've got all of our clients who invested in the Vintage Private Equity Fund with us, with Morning Bridge. All of them have got residency already, and they're well on their way. And obviously, some of our clients who invested in the very early years are already citizens. But yeah, brace yourselves. There are delays, definitely.
Can I just interject at that point to qualify? Is that if your application is in before the 31st, then it's at the 350. So regardless of it taking 8 months, it's still 350. It's only if you apply after January the 1st does it go up to 500.
That's quite
Colin's
correct.
question is, do you have to remain invested to keep the visa valid, or can you cash out and still retain the visa after a period of time?
So to answer your question, the law says one needs to retain the investment for a minimum of 5 years, and that takes you up to the end of your year 5, at which point you can apply either to become a permanent resident or you can go straight to your citizenship application. Our advice to clients is do not disinvest until such time as you've achieved the goal of either permanent residence or citizenship, because once you have those two statuses, then there's no longer a requirement. It's very important to note when you're applying for permanent residence after 5 years or citizenship, which you can do as well, to demonstrate links with the country. So if you've got an investment, you're paying tax on your local income, although in the case of the Rebello, you wouldn't be, you know, and all your tax returns are filed, etc., and you haven't disinvested, then they're going to look favorably upon you. You also do need to do a language test. But we do have clients who try and sell their property and buy another property. We just advise clients, don't start messing around with your investments during the period leading up to your citizenship. It's just not worth it, because you've got an immigration official dealing with these files, and if there's complexity, it just slows it down. So you're really in this for the long haul. I would say from investment date to hopefully when you become a citizen, you're probably looking at 7 years.
And this is from Tony, must the 350,000 euros be paid in full, or can we invest through using a bank loan? And then the second question is, what is the ROI return on investment, in other words?
Okay, I'll go on the first question in terms of the full amount. So as far as the Portuguese authorities are concerned, if they see 350,000 euros fresh capital coming in to Portugal via your bank account that we assist you with opening, they deem that as a qualifying investment. If you want to take out a loan outside of Portugal to fund it, that's up to you. You can portfolio lend. For instance, if you've got a big share portfolio in South Africa, some of the banks will lend you money against that. There are lots of ways of funding it from outside Portugal. But in terms of the Portuguese, they want to see new cash coming into the economy.
Yep. As far as the return on investment is concerned, as I mentioned earlier, every year we will give you 3% on the sum invested, which equates to 10,500, plus a share of the operating profit. Now, to give you some indication of that, it's a bit comparing apples with pears, I'm afraid. But the Hotel, the Vintage, which is our first private equity fund, which is operating in Lisbon, you are looking at a total return of around 4.5%. So that's 3% plus a 50% uplift of 1.5 to 4.5. Now, obviously, the generator of the returns is the hotel operations, and we have been in extraordinary circumstances in the last year. So we had to close the hotel on government strictures and the rest of it, but that's what you're looking at. One part that we haven't discussed at all, and I should have mentioned it previously, is what we're looking at for the life of the fund. Now, as Andy was alluding to earlier, is that you hold temporary residency for the first 5 years, and at that point, you then opt for permanent citizenship, permanent residency, sorry, or citizenship. So what we've said is that we will run the fund for a minimum of 6 years and a maximum of 10, and that will give everybody the opportunity to get to the 5-year stage and decide what they wish to do. And after that, we will look to liquidate the fund and return the original investment back to fund holders. Now, once you have your permanent residency, you could, in theory, sell your private equity unit, should you so wish. I think at that stage, the market is not to another golden residency visa buyer because they might not reach the full 5-year qualification period, but then it would be to an investor who is looking at the closure of the fund at year 10, for example. So that's the life of the fund. We'll get everybody who needs to get to citizenship to that point, and then we will look to liquidate the fund in its entirety. But that doesn't preclude people from selling the fund units either prior, if they no longer need it, the visa, or afterwards once they've got citizenship. But like I say, I think by that stage, people will want to hold on for the payout on the liquidation.
Okay, I'm hoping we can get through the rest of the questions because there are quite a few. AJ asks, you mentioned tax-free returns. What is the expected return on capital over time, and how is this dispersed? Alternatively, what is the expected increase in capital value?
Yikes. Okay. How long is a piece of string is what I would say initially on that, and I'm not trying to shirk the question by any means. The value of the hotel when it opens next year is going to be in the region of 53 million. So we think that there's going to be a capital increase instantly anyway. That much is, I mean, I don't have a crystal ball. What I will say is that property values in Portugal generally over the past 7 years have increased by about 15% a year. That's particularly true in Lisbon. Porto being a second city, if we say 10% a year just to be conservative, and I'd far rather be conservative, but we don't know what the effects of COVID are going to be, and I certainly don't have a crystal ball for a 10-year window or possibly an 8-year window when it actually comes to be sold. What we are looking at, if the indicators and history is no predictor of the future, is we're looking at probably an increase realistically of between 8 and 10% a year over the coming years. But post-COVID, post-shakedown of Europe and all the rest of it, I really honestly would not like to put a value on it. What I will say is that we're invested alongside you as well. As I said earlier, we try to align our interests as much as possible. So, you know, I have faith in this product, as do my fellow directors, and we will be in it for the long term.
Here's a question from Kobus, which is a little like one that was asked earlier. And it says, does the 350,000 cap the number of qualifying members of a family? So it's a little bit of an extension on the spouses, and I guess what he's asking is how many children or how many grandparents, etc.
Yeah, so that is a good question, and mentioning grandparents. So what the law says is the main investor can tag along the legal spouse, dependent children, and also dependent parents. It's really important to be able to prove that dependency. So if you do want to take your parents along, they can't be the funder of you and your family. They really do need to be dependent. And there are people out there who are saying, you know, they don't really check. You know, they do. And what you've got to understand in all these programs, the EU are not hugely supportive of these residency and citizenship programs. They allow them, but they're very, very strict about how these different countries run these programs, because they have been, you'll all be aware, last October in Cyprus, Al Jazeera blew a story on some corrupt dealings in their citizenship program, and that program was literally closed the next day. So it's really in the interest of these governments to run these programs properly, and they're not going to get caught letting people sort of slip through who don't really tick the boxes. So when we say dependents, they need to be dependent, and beware of lawyers who advise that, you know, you can always just take a chance. You're dealing with the EU here, and if you don't want to get a black mark. But to answer the question in a positive way, yes, you can take all your dependents up one generation and down to your children.
Colette's question is, will dividends be earned? Will you be earning an annual rate, or are returns only received when you sell your shares? Kerry?
Yeah, Alec, can I just ask you to flick on a slide or two, because that actually shows the development, both where we are. This is the construction which was taken last month. And if we flick on one more, it actually shows what it'll look like in the end. Okay. Going back to the dividends and the other questions, as I say, is we can't guarantee anything. What we say is we promise you 3% per annum. That is based on the 350 investment that you have, plus a share of the operating profit. We hope that the hotel will establish very quickly. Obviously, we have a track record within Lisbon already. With our predictions on budget and average room rates and ADR and the way that you look at hotels, is in year 3 of our hotels in Lisbon, we actually made the ADR, the daily rate, in year 1. So we've no reason to suspect that that won't be the case in this instance, but we will give you the 3% per annum. And even whilst the hotel is establishing after the first couple of years, well, even in the first year, we think that we might well be able to give you the share of the operating profit, because there will be one, unlike other hotels, which obviously take time to establish.
Okay, let's see if we can get through the last of our questions. Revere asks, do you facilitate finance? Andy, do you want to pick that up?
We can facilitate financing in Portugal on a real estate investment, because as long as an investor brings in the minimum 500, purchases a property, say for 700,000 or 800,000, we can actually arrange a local mortgage or bond for the balance. But the minimum 500 still needs to come in fresh. But on private equity, we don't have a solution for arranging financing. I guess your best bet would be to chat to your local bank in South Africa, wherever you're calling in from, and see if you've got some sort of asset that you can collateralize and borrow. But also happy if you want to reach out to me directly. I'm sure Alec will share our details at the end, and we can have a conversation and see if we can help you there.
Diana's question is, does this investment have to be permanent, or can you liquidate once you have the golden visa? I think you have already answered that the term of the investment is 5 years, but that was her other part of the question.
Yeah, as I said, the temporary visa is gained for 5 years, plus the original wait time, which Andy's already said is between 8 and 9 months. So realistically, you're looking at 6 years. It then takes up to 18 months, 2 years to actually sell the hotel and liquidate the fund. Now, obviously, what would happen then is that we would go to the market, we would find a willing buyer, we would agree a price, and then we have to take that price to the, at that stage, it's likely to be an EGM in order to liquidate the fund. But there is no reason why you, once you've got to the permanent residency stage or the citizenship stage, can't sell your fund unit. What I would advise you to do is just hang on that extra bit, because then obviously you'll take the upside of the value of the hotel when the fund is liquidated. But there's no reason that you can't. It will be for want of a better phrase, probably a carpetbagger investor who is willing to take it on from you, and then it's up to you to decide what price it would be and all the rest of it. So yes, you can sell it. You can sell it prior if you no longer need the visa as well. It is an asset that you own to keep or dispose of at your will.
Thanks, Kerry. Andrew? Andy, I think this is for you from Marion. She asks, if one doesn't have sufficient funds offshore, will a tax clearance certificate be needed? Do you envisage any problems with this?
No, so that's a good question, Marion. Look, we move a lot of money through Sable FX out of South Africa. So your allowances, I assume you're South African, but let's just assume that you're a South African resident with a green barcoded ID book. You, as a taxpayer, can take up R1 million a year out of South Africa per calendar year under what's known as your single discretionary allowance. So there's no need for tax clearance for that particular amount. And if you married, you and your spouse can each take R1 million. If you want to take more than R1 million, then you do need a foreign tax clearance certificate. And provided your tax affairs are in order, we can help you. We've got a tax specialist at our office in Cape Town. I mean, we literally do hundreds of these tax clearances a year for clients. So yeah, we've got a good in at SARS. We can probably get a tax clearance within a week. As I said, provided your tax affairs are all up to date.
Just before we end, Diana wants to know how she can contact you. Email addresses, please.
Right.
Okay.
Andy, do you want to, if you're going for the, sorry, Andy, go on.
Yeah, probably the best way to get hold of us would be golden visa at sableinternational.com. So that's one word, golden visa at sableinternational, one word.com. There it is at the back. And then you'll get hold of my team. We have staff both in Cape Town and Portugal. Natalie Ferreira, who's my colleague she's based in Cascais in Lisbon. She will deal with the inquiry initially, and then depending on what you're looking for, then we can get you in touch with Kerry and his team. But probably best to come through that. If you want to get hold of me personally, it's andrew.rissick@sableinternational.com. Thanks.
And if you want to talk any more, sorry, Alec, if I can just interject. If Andy will put you in contact with me directly, should you want to understand any more about the actual development and the structure and the process of going through to get the declaration within the fund certificate. More than happy to take individual questions at any juncture.
Excellent. And then the last question, Andy, comes from your namesake, Andrew, who says, does the private equity fund use any gearing itself?
Right.
That's probably a question for Kerry.
It is, yeah. Under the Articles of Memorandum of the fund, there is the possibility to get gearing within the fund itself. At the moment, we are in talks with a couple of Portuguese banks to have gearing in it if necessary. We're talking of a quantum of in the region of sort of 10 to 12 million. And what we would then do is reduce the private equity participation, or it's highly likely, I should say, that we would reduce the private equity participation instead of being 125 units down to possibly 80 units. And then we would look to, well, one of two options. We would look to pay off the debt through the normal hotel operations, or the other way we would do it is we would keep the fund at 125 units and we'd pay the debt off with those extra units.
Great. Well, there we go. We've come to the end of our time. We did go a little over 1 o'clock, but that's because we did start a little late. And again, my apologies for that. Thanks, guys, for enlightening us. I'm sure we're going to be returning to the subject again and again, because this is an area of great interest for the BizNews community. We know that anything to do with golden visas is appealing, and the way that you explained it, Andy, that, well, most South Africans prefer Portugal. I guess the weather is also pretty good, as well as the golf courses. So I've got to ask one last question. Do you have anything in Madeira? Is there I have a very close friend who was originally from Madeira, and he keeps telling me what a fantastic place that is. It's not Porto, it's not Lisbon, so perhaps that'll be open to investors as well.
Absolutely. Madeira is very much on the map. It's part of Portugal. It's you know, they've got their sort of territories and their islands, and both the Azores and Madeira were given special mention when the government instituted these changes, because part of taking Lisbon, Porto, and the sort of prime Algarve out of the golden visa qualification is actually to try and push investment to other parts of Portugal, including the islands. So yeah, please do get in touch if Madeira is what you want. I don't know if you've been there before. I have. It's a very beautiful island, about a 2-hour flight from here. But yeah, it's an island, so probably a slightly different investment, but we certainly can assist, and it does qualify for golden visa.
And from here, meaning you're in Lisbon, not here in Johannesburg or Cape Town. Well, thanks, gents. It's been real interesting hearing more about this, and look forward to the next time. Andy, Kerry, thanks for sharing your information. Do remember, if you need any more details, there it is on the slide. Until the next time, cheerio.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alec.
Cheers now.
Bye.